All right, this is going to be Chapter 6, Learning. All right, although we're not in class today, I still want to share with you this icebreaker, something just for you to go, and think about for yourself. If you were in groups, this is what we probably would have done in class. However, just look at the questions. The first one asking if you have a personal goal. Do you want to achieve, but you don't seem to have time to accomplish that goal because it might be too difficult. So what might that be? What kind of goal are you struggling with? And then with another person, a partner, develop a plan that will provide motivation for achieving a goal. The third question would be when you're working to achieve a goal, do you typically use an all or nothing approach, or do you try using incremental steps? What are the advantages or disadvantages of the choice you might have? All right. So anyway, by the end of the chapter, my hope is that you'll understand the assumptions and goals of behaviorism. You'll know the definition of classical conditioning as well as the procedures for producing and measuring it. And we'll talk about the procedures for extinction in terms of classical conditioning. We're going to talk about Ivan Pavlov and how he explained classical conditioning, and later talk about contradictions of his explanations. Furthermore, we'll be discussing classical conditioning as it pertains to drug tolerance. Then we'll start discussing operant conditioning and how it's different from classical conditioning. You'll learn the definition of reinforcement as well as in punishment. We're going to talk about the procedures of extinction and how it's different between operant and classical conditioning. We'll then talk about shaping, chaining, and schedules of reinforcement and how it alters behaviors. Then you'll learn how to cite examples in terms of practical applications. We're going to do real world examples in operant conditioning and explain how the conditioned taste aversions as well as birdsong learning might be different from the different types of learning that Pavlov and Skinner studied and discussed. We'll also look at research and how it supports the idea about predispositions in terms of learning connections and how some are more easier than others. And we'll also talk about the importance of social learning. So now let's move on to behaviorism and classical conditioning. So to get started, I think it's important for you to have a good understanding about what behaviorism is all about. Know that with behaviorism, it's learning by watching what we do. It's that observable type of behavior. More or less what we can see how people or even animals actually doing things, not what they might be thinking or feeling inside. With behaviorists, they're looking at the action. Early psychologists like John B. Watson as well as B.F. Skinner really felt that if psychology wanted to be a science, then that we should be focusing on the actions that can be measured, like speaking or salivating or pressing a lever or even studying for a test. They argued that our behavior is shaped more by our environment and not by mysterious inner thoughts or the consciousness. So, in other words, more or less what they feel is we learn through stimulus and response patterns. Now, when we're talking about stimulus and response psychology, the basic idea is this. A stimulus is anything in the environment that might trigger a reaction, like a sound or a word, even a smell, or my question, for example. When we're talking about a response, we're looking at the behavior that follows, like jumping or smiling, answering, or even cringing. Over time, we'll learn which responses might lead to rewards or punishments, and that's how habits may form. When I'm talking about how habits might form, think of this example. If your phone buzzes, which would be considered the stimulus, and you check it, that's the response, right? And you find a funny meme when you're surfing, that would be the reward. Or you're more than likely to check your phone again the next time it buzzes. So basically, think of it this way. Behaviorism equals learning through experience. You'll have a stimulus that creates a response that will have a consequence, and that equals learning. And for it to stick, we repeat what gets rewarded and we avoid what gets punished. So it's real simple, but it's a powerful thing to understand. And like I said, I say it's simple, but until we learn it, it can actually be a little confusing, but we'll get through it. Again, it's powerful enough to be able to explain how we might train dogs or how we might teach kids and even how we might condition ourselves to crave that morning coffee to get us going. That is what we'll start with, and that's an operational definition for behaviorism. Okay, so now this time around, I'm going to just give you a little more terminology to kind of help you understand things. And this is that confusing part I was telling you about, because we go use the use of letters to kind of help break it down for us. But with classical conditioning, or they might call it Pavlovian conditioning, because Ivan Pavlov kind of started this whole trend, who was a physiologist who decided he wanted to learn an experiment on dogs. But classical conditioning is that process in which the organism will learn to new associations between two stimuli. The stimuli, one would be a neutral stimulus, and one that's already going to evoke a reflexive response. So the unconditioned stimulus, or UCS, that's when it's going to elicit an unconditioned response. And when I mean that is, like, for example, if the dog, we're going to use Pavlov's dogs. If a dog sees food, what do? They salivate, right? They automatically see food and the tongue starts a wagging and you start seeing the drool. It's actually quite nasty. But the point of the matter is the unconditioned stimulus, which would be the food, is going to automatically elicit an unconditioned response, which would be salivation in this instance. That unconditioned response, again, is that action that the unconditioned stimulus elicited. Then you'll have a conditioned stimulus, okay? A conditioned stimulus, or CS, is a response that depends on a preceding condition, pretty much because we associated or paired the conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. And I'm going to talk more about that in an example in a moment. I just wanted to go through these terms. The conditioned response, or CR, would be the response that the conditioned stimulus will elicit as a result of the conditioning training procedure. Okay? Now, again, like I said, this is all just a bunch of gibberish because it don't make sense yet. Hopefully it will. Now, let's make sense of this, okay? As you can see, this is Pavlov's experiment, and you're going to be seeing how this conditioned stimulus precedes an unconditioned stimulus. And after the sufficient pairings, it turns from the conditioned stimulus to elicit a conditioned response, which can resemble the unconditioned response. So now, in this little picture that they put, I might try to find a larger one for you. But it starts off where One, let me go back to the unconditioned stimulus, which is food. We're going to take that and we're going to pair it with a tone, as you see here in the visual aid. When you pair the food with the tone, the dog automatically is going to salivate because of the what? Because of that unconditioned stimulus, right? But if you keep doing it repeatedly, that unconditioned stimulus is now being seen with the tone, heard with that tone. So eventually, if you keep doing this over and over and over again, eventually that tone will make the dog salivate just the same way the food did. Here's another way of putting it. I don't know if I have any dog lovers here, but do you ever notice when it's time to feed your dog, they know when you're about to do it? For an example, my son feeds our dog, and I can come near my dog at a certain time of the day and he does nothing. But my dog knows time when it comes to my son, because as soon as my son approaches him and bends over to go to a cabinet, my dog starts jumping, wagging his tail, salivating in the whole 9 yards, because he knows it's time to eat. He has associated my son bending over to the cabinet to know that it's time for his food. So that's the pairing. The constantly seeing him bend and pull out the food has now alerted, Alfie's his name, it alerted Alfie to know that it's mealtime. That's the same thing. So you could think of it in that measure. Here's another way. Let me change it from animals to people. Think about this. Whenever we are on the road and you pass a restaurant, what tends to happen? We might say, "Oh, all of a sudden out of nowhere, oh, you sure go for a burger." If you see those golden arches, you automatically think food. That's the same instance. So when you continuously associate and pair this with the unconditioned stimulus, that unconditioned stimulus to a neutral stimulus will create a conditioned stimulus, meaning that it has now been paired. We have that tone. I no longer need food to make my dog salivate, because when he hears that sound, he automatically thinks of food. All right, now let's talk about some other phenomena that happens in classical conditioning. Extinction. Now, extinction is when the conditioned response starts to weaken. And that's because we've been presenting the conditioned stimulus without the unconditioned stimulus, like the food and the tone. We've been giving the dog just the tone for a while now, and we hadn't paired it anymore with food. So extinction is, after some time, the dog won't salivate as much anymore because we hadn't repaired it. So that association is starting to weaken. Okay? So it might take more, and it would it can ultimately stop, and that's what the extinction is all about, meaning that we haven't done it together for a while. All of a sudden it's like, uh okay, I heard a sound, but so what? It's not making me hungry anymore. Spontaneous recovery, though, is out of the blue. Now, let's say we hadn't paired it in a month. The dog stopped salivating. You can ring that bell all the time, and all of a sudden, about a month later, the dog hadn't done it in a month, but all of a sudden he's salivating again because he heard that tone. That's what spontaneous recovery is about. It's a temporary return of an extinguished response after that delay of time. Now, granted, even though it came back, you heard the term temporary. If you don't repair the two things together again to strengthen it, it might just disappear. It might have been like a freak of nature or accident, and it doesn't happen again. So you have to take a look at it in that aspect as well. All right, so in terms of stimulus generalization, this is when the conditioned response is like anything that's similar to it. So, for example, with that tone, you hear beep, beep. Any other kind of sound that's similar to that might trigger the dog to salivate as well. That's stimulus generalization. Discrimination is when they can tell the difference and know that, okay, a whistle blowing is not going to elicit salivation like a bell ringing, because we use the bell, for example, as a tone. So that's discrimination. Stimulus generalization means that there's similarities between the stimulus, therefore it's going to elicit a conditioned response because of the similarities. Now, Pavlov felt that conditioning happens, pretty much because of two stimuli that's really close to each other. In time, it's connected to where the brain starts to see these representations. However, research has also demonstrated that animals really haven't been able to treat a conditioned stimulus as if it were an unconditioned stimulus. And more or less, time is not only the main factor here. Learning happens because the first stimulus actually predicted that second stimulus, meaning the food is what started it all. And because we paired it with the bell, we know that that's what happened. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that in Pavlov's case, he's saying it's immediate. They're saying that that's not the only thing, though. It's the fact that you have that food right at him, and it's the main source of making that stimulus conditioned. And it's not a freak accident, but the first stimulus, the food, is what's going to help us predict whether or not the dog will salivate to the bell, because we kept showing him, letting him hear the bell at the same time he's seeing the food. And it's that food that's creating this salivation. So now, effects of timing on classical conditioning, because as I've just mentioned, Pavlov felt that it's timing is everything in terms of conditioning the conditioned stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus. And it's really important that the conditioned stimulus happens often together with the unconditioned stimulus than apart. And again, there's controversy with that, but in terms of understanding Pavlov's frame of mind, know that it should be immediate. That if you was to try to present the food and then 5 minutes later ring the bell, and according to Pavlov, that's not going to work. Because what happens? The salivation already happened. The dog probably ate already. So you really want to try to do it as close as possible. So if you show the food, the next thing, ding, should be immediate. Food, ding. Food, ding. It's happening simultaneously. Therefore, he's starting to associate that, okay, that's happening. It's time to eat. Just like I mentioned with my son. My son's not ringing a bell. All my son is doing is bending over and opening the cabinet to pull the food out. But because Alfie sees him pull the food out, and yes, the dogs know the dog food bag. They hear it, they understand it, they get excited. So anytime my son bends over and opens up that cabinet to get the food out the cabinet, there it is. He's salivating, he's shaking that tail, and he's happy. And that is an immediate response because as soon as he opens it, he pulls out the food. And a minute later, he's eating. So that's the association. Whereas I can go in the room, Alfie's there, and he's looking at me, and he's happy to see me, but he's not expecting for me to feed him. And I can even go into the cabinet and he doesn't do anything because I'm not the person that is paired with. My son is actually the neutral stimulus in this case. Believe it or not. All right. Now, let's talk about the blocking effect. It's an established association to one stimulus, but it blocks any kind of association to an added stimulus. So I'm the added stimulus. My son, he's blocking that in the sense of I can go to that cabinet, I can open it up, but because my son has done it and paired with him more and he's been doing the actual feeding, I can even pull out that bag and my dog will not respond the same way he would if my son did it. That's what's the blocking effect. All right, so believe it or not, when we're talking about classical conditioning and talking about the behavior and actions of others, we can also associate this to kind of give you an understanding about drug tolerance. Know that with drug tolerance, we're talking about weakened states of how we might react after taking it repeatedly. For example, crack cocaine is the worst drug there is, if you ask me, more so than heroin and anything else because it had such a high addictive rate because a person would get instant high and then the time of being high is so short that they go back for more. That's what we're talking about with drug tolerance. And this is actually part of classical conditioning. So, through research, we've been able to determine that whether or not behavioral effects like injecting procedure can be weakened if the familiar setting is that of a new one. Okay, so let's go back to the crack cocaine. Person takes it for the first time. They think they're in nirvana. They are higher than a kite. 30 minutes later, it's gone, and they're like, "Wow, oh, I felt that was so good. I would love that again." And more or less, they do it over, and they do it over, and just like the pairing with the food and the salivation, it's the drug and the feeling that has been paired. That feeling of being high in the sky has now made it where that person will keep seeking the drug to keep chasing the high. Hopefully that made sense. So more or less tolerance is classically conditioned. And can we extinguish it? Out of sight can be out of mind, but there's a big withdrawal symptoms that we would have to deal with. But it's not impossible. All right, now let's check time. So I mentioned blocking effect. According to the blocking effect, when a new stimulus is added to a previously established stimulus, which of the two will be blocked? The original stimulus? The second added stimulus? They'll both be blocked, or neither will be blocked? What do you think? The second added stimulus is what would be blocked. The previously established association from one stimulus is stopping the formation of an association to the added stimulus. Remember, my son and the cabinet, that was the original pairing. I come in and add it, but my son kind of blocked me because Alfie got used to seeing my son open that cabinet and get the food. I can go in there and I can even pick up the bag of food and I don't get any reaction or behavior changes from Alfie because my son in his habit blocked it. Hopefully that made sense. All right, so operant conditioning is the next area that we're going to talk about. And here, let's look at some of the definitions and operant conditioning. No, it's the process of changing behavior, and we do that through reinforcing or using punishment. Now, it's going to be confusing here because a lot of people will get the wrong idea about the terms of positive and negative. I will try my best to explain it so that you understand. We're not talking about good or bad here. We're talking about increases or decreases, but we're not talking about good or bad. So I want you to disassociate from those terms in that realm, okay? But understand that a learning curve here is where the behavior is changing and it happens over time through the learning. Behaviors usually can be strengthened at the expense of others. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, think about it like this. When you are at work and someone gives you a pat on the back or tell you a good job, you kind of feel good about it, right? And it tends to make you satisfied to the point where you want to keep doing a good job. Or even better, it gets you a paycheck that somebody is paying you to do the job, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're saying strengthened by others. If you are at a job and you get paid, that means you're going to keep doing your job, right? That's what reinforcement's about. It's helping to increase the probability of a response that would be followed by a positive consequence, something that you're seeking and something that you want. Now, Edward Thorndike, he talked about the law and effect, and more or less it's that we tend to repeat responses that's going to lead to us feeling good and having good responses and consequences, even if we don't know why we're doing it. And sometimes it's where we're like, Dad, do I really need to be finishing doing this? But we're doing it because ultimately it's something that makes us feel good. Now, defining differences between operant and classical conditioning, just know that with operant conditioning, the behavior is produced is because of we want an outcome that's going to help future behavior. It's going to help us to predict whether or not that person will continue. That being either increasing the behavior or even decreasing it. Because remember, there's two sides of that coin. We have reinforcement and we also have punishment. Reinforcement, we're trying to increase the behavior, get them to continue doing something. Or punishment, meaning we're trying to reduce or eliminate a behavior. Hopefully that makes sense. And this is applying to all types of responses, including movement of leg muscles, arm muscles, and so forth. So it's a tangible response. You can see these type of responses. Whereas classical conditioning, the subject's behavior really has no effect on the outcome, meaning it's going to happen because of the stimulus, not because of the behavior itself. The behavior won't come up first, it's going to come after. Stimulus changes the behavior, but the behavior really don't control the events. It's again the stimulus that will. Visceral responses are those that would be of internal organs, like when we talked about the salivation and digestion. So those are just a couple of differences. All right, and I'm going to just skip this, but again, it's giving you an idea about talking about classical conditioning and how we would go about teaching a young child, so to speak, how to make their bed. What would we do? How can we pair? What we can pair with that to get a child to actually make their bed? What would be the benefits and disadvantages of this choice? And then think about this one for this class. How do your professor, Dr. Kearns-Cooper, prepare you for an upcoming quiz or an exam? Is that a type of classical or operant conditioning? So let's see. In order to take an exam, what do? I give y'all practice quizzes, right? So would that be classical or operant conditioning? Next time we get together, you let me know. All right, so now let's continue on and talk about reinforcement and punishment. Let me give you some background info. Let's start first with the disequilibrium principle. Now this is when we're keeping life in balance. So imagine your day as a balancing act that's going to be between the things you want to do and then those things you have to do. So now the disequilibrium principle, it's all about how whenever something keeps you from being able to do the things that you really, want to do, like those favorite activities that you might have. You may feel out of balance, or as the term is, disequilibrium. Here, it's you getting the chance to do activities again that's going to feel rewarding, even enforcing. So think of it like this. Say you love TikTok. Everybody's into TikTok, right? Or you like to draw and sketch. But you've been stuck writing essays all day or doing your paper that Dr. Kearns-Cooper wants you to have ready for November 21st. And you're finally getting to do your favorite thing that feels like, that's the prize. So to return to balance or back to what feels normal or pleasurable for you, that would be that reinforcer. So you might say, okay, if I get one page of Dr. Kearns-Cooper paper done, then I am going to get back on TikTok and have some fun. More or less, that's how we do it. So like with teachers or parents or even your own brain use this principle all the time. You can't binge Netflix, can't Netflix and chill until you've done some studying. The studying throws you off balance, and that's the disequilibrium. And Netflix and chill is your sweet spot. It's reinforcing the way back to equilibrium. Then let's talk about primary versus secondary reinforcers. Now, okay, the way I can say it is, let's unpack two kinds of rewards that might keep this balance system going steady. When we have primary reinforcers, these can be also considered unconditioned reinforcers. These are those natural pleasures, the ones that don't have to be learned. It's automatic. They feel good all by themselves. Like food when we're hungry, water when we're thirsty, warmth when we're cold, or vice versa, cold when we're hot, the affection when we're lonely. Your brain doesn't need a psychology class for you to know these things. These are things that happen automatically, and they are rewarding. Then there's secondary reinforcers. These are conditioned reinforcers, okay? And these are the learned rewards that more or less becomes reinforcing because they're connected to something valuable. Earlier, I talked about having a job and getting paid. Money. Money's important, right? Because what it does, it buys food, or it helps with our experiences when we want to go to a concert or hang out. Your grades, because Your grades help you lead to success. If you pass everything, you will graduate from college. Or even when you get likes on social media, because they give you social approval. So you see, they don't satisfy a biological need directly, but hey, they're still gonna make you feel good. And your brain start to learn that connection, and it learns it fast. So putting this all together, when you're blocked from doing what you love, that disequilibrium, is gonna hit you. But your motivation will start to rise and to restore that balance. And whether this reward comes as a primary reinforcer, like having your favorite meal or your favorite snack, or the secondary one, like when you get paid from working, your brain again is going to turn around and say, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. We're back in balance. We're back in sync. And that's how this all works out and all goes together. Now let's talk a little bit about positive and versus negative reinforcement. This is really having the same goal, but different routes that we take. Reinforcement, again, is all about increasing the behavior, making it more likely to happen again. And that's the main thing I want you to keep in mind. The difference between positive and negative reinforcement, again, that's not about good versus bad. So get rid of that. It's about whether something is going to be added or taken away to make the behavior stronger. So, okay, it's time for me to break this down, hopefully where it makes all the sense in the world. So when we're talking about positive reinforcement, I want you to remember, add something you like. That means you add something pleasant after a behavior to encourage it to happen again. An example like this here would be you studied really hard for that midterm last week, right? You get an A for the midterm and you felt really good, really proud. And you might have decided, okay, you know what? I deserve to hang out tonight. Or you might have just gave yourself a Starbucks treat. You're more likely to study hard next time because it paid off. Or here's another one. A parent praises their child for cleaning their room. The praise is added where it's given that behavior to be strengthened. So this is positive, and it's equaling adding a reward that makes you want to repeat the action. Now, a negative reinforcement is removing something you don't like. What do I mean by that? You take away something unpleasant after a behavior, which will encourage the behavior to happen again. What's an example of this? Okay, let's try this one. You know how we're in the car? What do you have to do when you first get in your car? Hopefully you're doing this. You buckle your seatbelt, right? Now, if you don't buckle your seatbelt, what happens? Beep, 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 beep. And it keeps going until you do what? Buckle that seatbelt. So you're more likely to buckle up right away next time because you what? Don't feel like hearing the beep. Or you take an aspirin. You take the aspirin so your headache can go away. Now you probably take one again the next time your head starts to hurt. So this negative is equaling to removing the hassle or unpleasant condition, and that relief feels is the real reinforcer. So you automatically are going to go for the painkiller to what? Feel better. Okay, so that's what positive reinforcement is. That's what negative reinforcement is. Positive reinforcement, presenting something like the food. Negative reinforcement, avoiding something like that headache. And reinforcing is the opportunity to either escape or avoid any kind of danger. Hope this is making sense. That we talked about reinforcement. Now let me go briefly over punishment. You have positive versus negative punishment. Here we're talking about decreasing the behavior. And the rule of thumb is punishment equals anything that will reduce a behavior. So if the behavior becomes less likely to happen again, you've used punishment. The words positive and negative, again, doesn't mean good or bad, but it is describing whether or not you're adding something or taking something away. So when we say positive punishment, here we're adding an unpleasant. What do I mean? I mean, you add an unpleasant consequence after a behavior, so it's less likely to happen again. Okay, here's an example. A student talks back in class. Thus, the teacher assigns extra homework. Or you come to class after 10:15 and your teacher, Dr. Kearns-Cooper, says, "Have a nice day, see you next time." So you get the drift on that, right? Another way to think of it, you might touch a hot stove and what happens? You're going to feel pain. You'll learn really fast not to touch it again. Or let's talk about the phones again and how it buzzes, particularly during a movie. Hence, you get evil eyes from your friends and everybody sitting around you and they're starting to shush you. Now, in each case, something unpleasant was added and that discouraged the behavior. Negative punishment means we're taking away something pleasant. And the definition that you can go with for this is you remove something desirable after a behavior to decrease it. Like if you are late for class again, no. Let me stop. But a teenager might miss curfew. That's a real example. And so what happens? The parent's going to take away the car keys. And then they're grounded. A kid might fight with their brother or sister. They get to lose game privileges. They can't get on their Xbox. You're late on rent. So the landlord might keep your deposit or even worse, want to threaten you with eviction. Here, something good is taken away to make you sure that that behavior doesn't repeat itself or happens again. So more or less this slide is showing you how behaviors leads to an event. With positive reinforcement, again, we're increasing the behavior. With punishment, we're decreasing it. And when we're talking about behavior avoiding an event, then looking at punishment, negative punishment will decrease the behavior. Negative reinforcement, which we considered escape learning, will actually increase the behavior. So just remember when we're talking about reinforcers, we want to increase behaviors. When we're talking about punishment, we want to decrease behaviors. And do not think good or bad for positive or negative. We're either adding or taking away something to make the reinforcers work or the punishments work. So again, when we're talking about additional phenomena of operant conditioning, know with operant conditioning, it's really all about learning through consequences. Meaning what happens after a behavior, if the behavior brings good results, you're probably going to repeat it. If it doesn't, then you'll eventually stop. So there's at least 4 important parts that hopefully will help shape how learning happens for you. Now, you heard a distinction in classical conditioning, but it's also present in operant conditioning. And here, if it stops working, you stop doing. So extinction happens when a behavior no longer produces the reinforcement. So it might fade away or over a period of time. An example of this can be, hey, you tell a joke. Your friends at first they laugh. That was the reinforcement. But after a while, your jokes are not getting those laughs anymore so it's not going to reinforce. So eventually you figure you better stop telling the jokes. That's what extinction's all about. Think of it like your brain saying, well, it used to work, but I'm not getting that laugh anymore, so I better save my breath and save my energy. And if you know you don't have a good sense of humor, then it's probably a good thing that you extinguished it anyway. Haha. But let me move on. We have stimulus generalization. And I spoke about the classical conditioning way, but guess what? It's also an operant conditioning. Here we're talking about stimulus generalization when you respond the same way to things that are similar to the original stimulus that was reinforced. Sounds familiar, don't it? So an example of this is, let's put Alfie back to the forefront. Alfie's trained to sit when I say sit. And it might also sit though when you say sit down. Or let's think about a student being praised for polite behavior with one teacher. They might act the same way with all their teachers, hoping to get the same thing, right? So your brain really goes through this. You know what? This all feels familiar. I think I'll use this over again and do it again. That's stimulus generalization in operant conditioning. Now with discrimination, more or less is just saying not that one. But it means that you've learned to tell the difference between similar stimuli and respond only to the ones that makes you feel good or is reinforced. Here we'll take a look at an example where a child might learn that crying gets their attention from mom but not from dad, so they only cry for their mother and not their father. Another example, again, we'll bring Alfie into this. Alfie learns to fetch when I blow a whistle, but not when I ring a bell. So this is that way of the brain saying, okay, well, that sound meant treat time, but really? With a discriminative stimulus, this is where the cue that sets the stage is what you can think about. It's a signal or a cue that tells us when a particular response will lead to reinforcement or it won't. Think of this for an example. When you see a sale sign in the store, it might signal that buying something now might get you a good deal. Whereas the Wi-Fi connected symbol on your phone tells you it's a good time to be able to stream your favorite show. Or another example might be a teacher's smile and nod might signal that at this right moment, you might want to share your idea because they seem open to it. It's that green light that says, all right, go ahead, I can speak up. Whereas if your teacher, or I'll just use me, Dr. Kearns-Cooper is frowning, you might not want to approach me with a question, right? So that's where the reinforcer is, okay, she's smiling, she looks approachable, let's go for it. Now's the time to act. So those are the different type of phenomena I wanted to make you aware of in terms of operant conditioning. Now let's talk about those influential theorists. Meet B.F. Skinner. He's considered to be the architect for behaviorism. His whole name is Burrus Frederick Skinner. And he was a psychologist who took behaviorism to a whole new level. While early behaviorists like John B. Watson, they focused on observable behavior. But Skinner, He wanted to understand how behavior learned and maintained through consequences. He believed that free will was less important than the environment shaping our actions. So, more or less, we don't just act, we react to the rewards and punishments around us. He developed the concept of operant conditioning, that being the idea that behavior operates on the environment to be able to produce consequences. Using devices like the Skinner box that he created, where rats were able to press levers for food, he was able to study how reinforcement and punishment shape learning in both animals as well as humans. All right, so let me define shaping for you. Shaping is when we're learning in small steps. More or less, we take that to learn a new behavior by reinforcing small, gradual steps toward the final goal. Instead of waiting for a complete behavior to appear, you reward the approximations, right? That's giving little actions that get closer and closer to what you really want. An example of this might be you want to train a dog to be able to roll over, right? Okay, so the first thing you might want to do is reward the dog for just lying down. Then reward the dog for turning its head to the side. Then you're going to reward the dog for rolling onto its back. And then finally, you'll reward the dog for completing the full roll. So as you can see, each small step earns reinforcement until the dog masters the entire trick. Think of shaping as saying, okay, you're getting warmer. So that's shaping. Then you have chaining. Chaining is when we're building a sequence of behaviors. You can define it as involving linking several learned behaviors together to be able to formulate a sequence, where each step acts as a cue for the next step, where each small action becomes part of a chain that will then lead to a larger complex behavior. An example of this might be where teaching a child to wash their hands. They turn on the faucet, they wet their hands, they apply the soap, they scrub their hands, then they rinse it off with the water. They'll turn off the faucet, they're going to dry their hands. Each step will trigger the next step. And then when the whole chain is completed, that's when the reinforcement will occur. So Skinner more or less showed that even complex actions, like when we're playing a song on a piano or we're cooking to make breakfast or dinner, that it's made up of smaller learned links. So just use this slide as a reminder of some of the things I just mentioned in terms of shaping and chaining. With shaping, you establish a new response by reinforcing successive approximations to it. After the reinforcement, you change the rules, and the reinforce only isn't going to improve the behavior. Then you'll just continue to move boundaries to help shape that behavior some more. When we're talking about chaining, again, you're reinforcing each behavior with the opportunity to engage in the next behavior. Remember, links. You start with the desired behavior, and thus you'll learn behaviors that will lead to the desired behavior. Meaning you're going to take those different little behaviors in between and link them all together until you get the desired behavior you want. Okay, so I just noticed that I'm well over 50 minutes. It's 54 minutes. So I'm stopping here. Please make sure you scan this QR code because this is the only way you'll be marked attended for today, Monday, October 6th. I will be seeing you again on Wednesday where we'll continue discussing learning. Thanks for listening. See you soon.